We have three smart, incisive political thinkers up here. I don't want to get in their way, and you don't want me getting in their way. My job is to get them talking about the things that are going to help all of us navigate the weeks ahead in this campaign, to get them talking about the things that are going to help us figure out what matters to each of us in this incredibly deadlocked race. So nobody here is running for office right now, so I want them to be as blunt as they can be about the parties, about the candidates, about the prospects ahead. And as they talk, I want all of you to listen carefully and think about the questions that you want them to answer. We're going to frame this conversation through the lens of leadership, engagement, and representation. And other than that, it will be open to everything you want us to talk about. So please, I'd like them all to come up, Alison, Desmond, and Bob. Let's begin.
I'm a big believer in Parliament, and I think one of the amazing things about Parliament, if you sort of study its many hundreds of years of history, even before it was formed in Canada, is how adaptable a system it is to change. And that sort of drives to the larger point I was trying to make, is that, you know, I think one of the issues that are facing all of us that care about politics is how do we create or reform a politics that is more relevant in the 21st century. I don't know if having 500 MPs versus 300 is actually that material to that question, but there is a larger issue on how, and I put this on elected leaders to create a politics that's more inviting and relevant, particularly to, I'll use the statistic of 40% of Canadians who didn't vote in the last election. And that's, I think, a telling mark. I think part of that can begin with the stories elected officials tell about themselves. I was, along with my colleagues at Samara, involved in a really interesting project where we did exit interviews with 80 former members of Parliament from all across the spectrum. And the first question we asked them to sort of, we thought, warm up the conversation was, how did you get interested in politics? And all of them, save for one, had some version of a story that went something like this. I had never thought of it before, I didn't want to do it, somebody asked me, they had to come back multiple times and beg me until finally I agreed to run. And these were all people that were highly involved in their community, often in their political parties, and of course, they were interested in politics. And why were they so afraid to admit it? So I think, there was one MP, at least that I interviewed, who said, you know what, I thought politics was a wonderful way to make a contribution to my country, and I had my eye open for an opportunity to contribute. That's not a very controversial statement, but we don't hear it nearly enough.
Social media for politics is just crap. It's just garbage. Politicians don't engage in a legitimate and honest way with us any more now than they did before. It's actually worse. And the partisanship, I love Twitter. Those of you who know me here know that I like to use Twitter a lot to communicate. And when I'm not a politician, but I engage in a lot of social campaigns and information campaigns, and it's a great way to engage, to debate, to actually go back and forth. And it's not easy with 140 characters, but with a little patience and some skill, you can learn how to do it. Politicians don't want to learn how to do it, and their political acolytes don't want to learn how to do it. They want to blast out one-way messages just like they would in a press conference, and they don't want to answer anybody or engage with anybody. So I don't think social media has helped us with politicians at all.
One of the things we're doing when we create a new kind of political engagement is that a lot of our definitions of weakness and strength and coherence and incoherence and chaos and order have to change a little bit. That we can't just use the old lingo to judge a new way. And I think a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of other political leaders about this over time, and a lot of them just say, look, it's not going to work. The only thing that works is you give people a choice, up or down, this or that, and you say to your MPs, well, you might not have wanted to do this when you came in this morning, but this is what we're going to have to do, and I need your support, and you're going to have to do it. And people line up and do it. But eventually what happens is those people just say, well, what's the point? Why would I stay? Why would I stay and go? And it's not just ordinary MPs, it's cabinet ministers. I mean, the level of discouragement about, well, how much can I do and how much am I allowed to influence events goes up higher and higher. Because the cabinet minister says, well, I have less power than some 25-year-old kid who's advising the prime minister or the premier as to what to do. And that person comes into my office and says, "You're expected to do this, minister." He says, "Well, who the hell are you? I'm the minister." It doesn't work like that anymore. And that's part of what we're seeing in terms of this, the discouragement which Samara showed in their exit interviews, was people just feeling frustrated that they felt disempowered. They felt that they came to be somehow empowered, and Parliament was an emasculating place for them. It wasn't an empowering place. And no wonder people get discouraged when that happens. So if your politicians feel that way, imagine how you feel as a citizen. And I think that's the challenge that we're facing in our democracy, is that people don't feel empowered. They don't feel they're respected. They don't feel they're taken seriously. And there is a deep sense of frustration at the heart of the process.
One of the big failings I see in our politics today from our side, from the community side rather than the political side, is that we can't scare politicians these days with big mass mobilizations of people who are going to come get them if they don't do what we want, the way that people have been able to when they've been really successful in advancing something. When people are successful in advancing something, it's because I've heard a story about Johnson watching anti-Vietnam War protesters gather outside the White House and saying to Henry Kissinger, you know, they're going to knock down the gates and come get us. And whoever was telling the story said, you know, that's the ideal state that we want to have our politicians in all the time. And I agree.
Worried about the gates.
Yeah, you've got to be worried as a politician that people can mobilize and will mobilize if they really believe in something and are worried that you're not going to do what they want.
I mean, moral leadership feels a bit like beauty sometimes, and that it's in the eye of the beholder. And I mean, part of politics is determining, the contestability of what is a moral issue from different points of view. You referenced the refugee crisis, but when you look at a country like Canada, which is, one of, if not the most privileged country in the world in many ways, notwithstanding our many faults, which we have elaborated in some detail already. I think there is a responsibility there to alleviate more suffering than we do. And this isn't there's a lot of partisan conversation right now, but this, as Open Canada pointed out this week, is our decline in our willingness to alleviate suffering globally has been occurring for 30 years or more. We spend about half on what we used to on our defense and our global development budget. And that is just extremely unfortunate. And perhaps, Bob, to your point about, how people reacted to that photo, but, for people who do worry about this, it's hard not to see that steady erosion when you know how much suffering there is in the world. So I know you didn't ask explicitly about that, but I think one of the most encouraging things to me so far about watching this election campaign has been the degree to which international issues have taken a forefront. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us in Canada, as very global citizens, by the way, to think about that a little bit more seriously than we have. And that's on all of us, and not moving our governments in that direction.
The real issue that we have to ask ourselves is, with respect to moral leadership, it can't be leadership for a day or for an instant or over an emotion about a picture in a newspaper that captured the attention of the entire globe. And one of the things about globalizing an instantaneous media is that you can have an instant reaction. And I can tell you for sure that in all of the political parties, people are trying to assess, well, how deep is that? And where do we go with that? And how do we take it? And we really need to ask ourselves a deeper question, which is, we live in a world where there's terrible suffering and where there are many kinds of suffering. We have to ask ourselves as individuals, what can I do about that and live a life? And what do we expect our politicians to do about it? And I think it is a really, really interesting question. I mean, I found it fascinating that the week that everybody said, oh, Mr. Harper had a terrible week, he handled this so badly, and his people were so out of touch, and they seemed to be tone deaf to what was going on. In the little daily polling that we see every day, actually went up a little bit. So what did that tell you? I mean, It's really important for us to try to understand this from a deeper perspective than sort of saying it's instantly moral. The other thing is, there are different moral judgments one can reach. It's not just one clear, moral way to be and then the other way. We don't choose in politics between, wonderful sunlight and then the deep darkness of evil. It's much more complex than that.